Hey, Dr. Joe here. So I wanted to talk about a very specific presentation today, clinical presentation, and that presentation has to do with, you ever heard of this happening or this happened to you where, uh, man, my back's really hurting, my neck's really hurting, I should go in and get a massage, and usually that works really well for me, so I'm gonna go get the massage and feel better, and then I'm good to go. But instead of feeling better after the massage, the person gets uh, you might get vertigo, or you might get a really, really sore back after that. And the deep tissue work, instead of helping, seem to exacerbate the issue. Um, so if that is something that you're familiar with or you've heard that happen, I just want to kind of explain what's going on. This is something that plays out quite a bit. We see this happening a lot. And so people are often confused by that, which makes sense. So here's what's going on with that, okay? So if I'm just going to draw couple of vertebrae here. Let's say this could be the neck or the low back. Really, it doesn't really matter. Let's just say for the sake of this example, this is the neck, or excuse me, the low back. Okay, so there's the spine. Here's the discs that go between each vertebra, right? And then we have these muscles. Okay, muscles, they're called intrinsic spinal muscles. They connect the segments together. Okay, these are called intertransversary muscles here. These little muscles here are called interspinalis. And then you have what are called rotators, which connect sometimes two segments above. Sometimes they just connect one segment above. Okay. All right. Now, then you have these other muscles that kind of go on top of these. These are called paraspinal muscles. Okay, they're off the spine. And so what these green muscles do is they like bend the body to the left or to the right. They contribute to extension of the back, okay? But these little red muscles, what they contribute to is stability of the spine, right? And so when your muscles are stiff, when you feel stiffness, what generally is going on is these muscles that are designed to bend and twist and extend, they kick on here when these red muscles become unstable, okay? So when the muscles here aren't working very well, when these muscles aren't doing their job, then it's like their job is to stabilize the spine, okay? So when they're not doing their job, the muscles that their job is to move the spine, they get tighter. Makes sense, right? So what you end up having is you get this backup system of muscles that are designed to move the spine, end up getting really tight to stabilize the spine. And so it would make sense then if they get really tight to stabilize the spine, but their primary job is to move, what ends up happening is you feel stiff and then you can't move because those muscles now are locked down trying to stabilize the structure, and that's not really their primary function. Is everybody with me? Does that kind of make sense? So why does this happen? Okay, these muscles here, the red muscles, okay, these are called intrinsic muscles of the spine. We'll call this little I for intrinsic. Okay, they are not volitional muscles. It's not like this. You can go, oh, I'm going to contract my intrinsic muscles of the spine. You can't really do that. You can move your body and they'll automatically contract based on your movement. But the idea is there should be contracted to some extent, just being gravity. Okay, and so there's this little signal that your inner ear gives your spine. So when your head tilts this way, it sends a signal into your spine, and it's like, oh my God, I'm falling to the left, so I probably should stabilize myself so that I don't fall over. Okay, and so these muscles start to activate. Okay, and it's totally non-voluntary. Okay, they're tonically activated. You can't just like turn them on and turn them off just by thinking about it. Okay, so basically when these muscles fail, then the green muscles, which are the voluntary muscles, okay, that help us move, these are for moving, we get rigid. This is what we were just talking about, right? you end up not being able to move because the moving muscles now become stabilizing muscles. But why do these stabilizing muscles go offline? If they're non-voluntary, like why do they go offline, right? So the reason they go offline is there's a signal from your inner ear, okay? It's called a vestibular ocular reflex, but that goes up, okay? And then you have what's something called a vestibulospinal reflex, okay? So this is a cool like little reflex here. So your head moves one direction. Okay, your head moves, and then as it moves, it sends a signal into your brainstem, and then it sends a signal into your cerebellum, and it coordinates the movement of your spine to adapt to what your head is doing. Okay, so if your body's moving, your spine will stabilize based upon the integration of vision, your inner ear, and what your muscles, ligaments, and tendons are telling you. Okay, so those are the three systems that will determine what's going on with your intrinsic spinal muscles. Your inner ear, which is one, okay, your eyeballs, okay, which is two, and then feedback from the actual muscles themselves is three. Those are the three systems that interface and will determine if you have a stable spine or not, okay? So the part of the brain that will coordinate that activity is called the cerebellum, and that lives on the back of the head. And so a person can have an issue with their vision, an issue with their inner ear, or an issue in the feedback from the muscles themselves, or those things could be normal and the cerebellum doesn't work and does not coordinate that activity properly. Okay, so what happens if these muscles here are really loose or they're not tonically activated? The discs end up becoming vulnerable to injury. So then these muscles on the outside will get really tight to stabilize. Okay, so you're basically splinting in order not to really injure yourself. Okay, so what happens if a well-intentioned massage therapist comes in or you do some sort of body work and these muscles here have shortened, okay, they're shorter to try to stabilize this situation here. But if the person goes in and gets them stripped out or they get like some sort of body work that now lengthens these muscles and removes the compensation that was actually a protective mechanism, then what happens is now you have intrinsic spinal muscles that are turned off here, and you have the splinting muscles are turned off. And so what you feel right away is you feel this extreme relief. You're like, oh my God, I can move. This is phenomenal. I can move. And you feel this tremendous relief. But you're moving, and now instead of being stable, you're unstable. So in some ways, your range of motion actually could be better than it normally would be because now you have all this extra movement, right? So what ends up happening is a rebound spasticity or tightening or myofascial response of these green muscles because these muscles still didn't turn on. These muscles still didn't turn on. Okay? So what ends up happening? Person feels relief and then they hurt really, 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 really bad. And so that the long and short of this is I've seen clients that are extremely demoralized because they've had these chronic back issues forever, and they've seen the best massage therapist or the best PT or the best OT, or they've seen the best acupuncturist, the best chiropractor, and they're getting all this muscle work and they're getting all this body work to release the tension in these green muscles. Like you might put something like interferential on the back and like zap the muscles, okay, to try to get them to release enkephalin and relax, which feels good. Okay, but ultimately, if these other muscles, the intrinsic spinal muscles, don't get activated or the cerebellum is unhealthy and can't regulate them properly, then what ends up happening is either a person gets better for a little while and it just comes back, or worse yet, they get worse right away because they've released their compensation, okay? Now, imagine if these three systems, okay, the inner ear, the visual system, and the muscles, ligaments, and tendons all have to have this balance and interface going on. And imagine what happens when that balance or interface gets screwed up. Okay, so let's say like a person has a stone in their ear. Okay, you ever heard of a person getting like a little like rock or a little piece of calcium loose in their inner ear and they get vertigo from that? So you've ever heard of somebody when they tip their head back, they feel like the world is spinning? That's something called vertigo, right? So we have these canals in our inner ear. Let me make those a different color. We have the canals in our inner ear, and basically these canals, I'll draw little tiny ones here. Okay, if I can pick the right thing. Okay, these little canals kind of live in the inner ear. So I'll make them nice and big over here, okay? They all come together like this, okay? And inside the canals are these little hairs. They're called kinocilium, and there's fluid inside this canal. And so the hairs are free floating in this fluid at the top, okay? There's this little calcium membrane on top of them. And what can happen is that calcium membrane partially can break off. So you can see in this little spot here that the calcium membrane broke off. And so it can start free floating in the canal. So when you tip your head back, the calcium will float downhill and it will stimulate these little hairs. And those little hairs tell you that your body's moving even though it isn't, okay? Now what can happen is because there's movement in this canal and the body's like, we're not moving, it'll use your muscles here to compensate, right? So sometimes people have this thing happening in their inner all the time and they're not aware of it. The only thing they're aware of is that their muscles are really, really, really tight and they can't explain why their neck is so freaking tight. So if we pretend for a second this is the neck now instead of the low back, person goes in with a really stiff neck, they get some awesome body work on their neck, body work that for somebody that didn't have this issue would be probably the perfect thing for them and always helps them feel better. But in this case, they got the body work, they made these muscles get longer, and these muscles were tight as a compensation for a weakness in the vestibular system. And so as a result, those muscles were no longer compensating and the person gets vertigo. Okay, so if you've ever had a massage or you know somebody that had a massage and they got up off the table and they felt like the world was spinning and it went away for a little while, but then for a few days after that, like every time they moved their head, they felt like they wanted to throw up or they felt like the world was spinning and then eventually it stopped. It could be that the neck muscles were compensating for a lack of function in one of these three systems. In this example, the vestibular system. And so removing the tightness was removing the body's compensation. And because they lost their compensation, they no longer could compensate for that piece of calcium moving in the canal. And so now when that calcium moves in the canal, they feel like dizzy. Okay. And so what they might think is like, oh my God, like something happened in the massage and now I have vertigo and I never did. And the probability is this was always going on, but the well-intentioned massage therapist or acupuncturist or chiropractor maybe released a muscle that was actually helping you compensate. So the solution in that scenario would be to position the head in such a way that this calcium chunk floats down the canal, and then there's this little area where it can exit and pop out. And when it pops out, it can get reabsorbed after a couple of days, and so then it doesn't become a problem anymore in a lot of cases. Okay, that's a condition called benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. It's a very common thing, and it seems to be more commonly in the elderly. And it's not because elderly people are the only ones that have these calcium crystals floating around. It's because their brain is starting to fatigue and they can't compensate for it anymore, okay? Or they're losing their ability to compensate for things, and so now it's showing up, okay? So in scenario one, what you would want to do is work with your intrinsic muscles of your spine by doing the neurological work to get these guys activated, okay? And what you would do, and once you activate these muscles here, these muscles now can relax and go back to moving the spine. And so that's kind of a cool thing. We'll see that when we do cerebellar activation that's specific to that client, these muscles no longer need to hold on, and they get instantaneous changes in their pain and range of motion. Okay, if you've ever experienced that, please share your story. And in the second scenario, person that has a super tight neck might go in and get a massage, and they release the tight muscles in the neck, and they release the compensation that the brain was using so they wouldn't experience vertigo. And so now they experience vertigo. And the proper course of action in that scenario would be to go to a doctor that could identify what's called a vertigo or a paroxysmal positional vertigo, and then do a repositioning maneuver that would cause the calcium to pop out of that little canal, and then they could fully recover. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. I had a number of clients coming in the last couple of weeks where this was a scenario, and so I just wanted to get this video out there so people were aware of it, because it's really demoralizing. Like I said, it can be expensive to go in somewhere and have something like that happen, and then not know what to do next and just be in a lot of pain. So the expense would be missed days of work and buying special apparatuses to help with pain, or expensive doctor visits to get diagnosed for procedures that actually might be correctable instead of like surgical. Okay. And let's see if there's anything else about this that could be helpful. So the first level would be to understand, okay, that's the story that's happening when a person gets like really good deep tissue work, and they're much worse as a result. That's one possible scenario, very common scenario. And then the other level would be to try to understand, well, what's special about that moment? Okay, so if a person has a low back issue that's pretty common and it seems to come out at certain times, the question would be, well, why is it coming out now? Okay, so like a client might tell you that their back is always tighter the day after they have alcohol. Okay, if they have more than one drink of wine, one more glass of wine, the next day they know they're going to pay for it, their neck's going to be stiff, their back is going to hurt. And in that scenario, the part of the brain called the cerebellum up here that was supposed to regulate all of that, actually, we know that all the roadside tests for alcohol are cerebellar tests, or most of them. And so there's a good probability that they're just describing a vulnerability in their cerebellum. And so they might benefit from somebody diagnosing a cerebellar issue and working with their brain to get that back online so they can enjoy a glass of wine from time to time and not pay for it. Another common scenario is when a person has really high stress. Okay, they get really stressed out. So they go from a normal posture to kind of this like high shoulders, tight neck, and like tight hips posturing where they're a little more flexed. Imagine if you have a flexion in the low back and the natural curve of the low back is to be an extension, how much strain it can put on the system. So if there's any vulnerability already in that system, putting somebody in a flex posture, making them sit more than they normally sit, or if they're like really stressed out emotionally, and that's peaking on them, then they can end up with like an emotional low back situation. Emotional low back really oftentimes is the story of these muscles are really tight on the outside because these muscles are not able to compensate and keep the spine stable with that new posturing. So anyway, hopefully that information is super helpful. If you've experienced this before and are stuck, this hopefully will get some dialogue going with the person that's managing your case so that you can get a better recovery. And if you've had this story happen to you before, or you found a good solution, please share it here so we can get some dialogue going to help the other people that might still be stuck. All right, have a great day. We'll catch you later on. Bye.